Hello everybody and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. Today I've got an update video for you on the Venator Star Destroyer. This thing has taken so much time, it is such a big project, but I have an update for you guys. We're going to take a look at how I got to this point. There's still a lot more work to be done on this, but I'm at a good point where I thought I'd make a video about it. So when we left off, we had the Venator fully assembled, but it wasn't smooth, it definitely wasn't painted. So let's go over exactly how I did that. So as with any 3D print, the first thing we're gonna need to do is fill in those 3D printer lines so that our ship looks uniform and is smooth and ready for painting. Now for a long time I used Bondo glazing and spot putty for this, but lately I've switched over to a technique that uses 3D printer SLA resin. Now this resin starts off as a liquid, but when it interacts with UV light, like ultraviolet light, like from the sun, it'll harden. Now this resin is very easy to apply over the entire Venator. You can see me just using a paintbrush to just brush it on. So you can cover a large area in a short amount of time, which is part of the reason why I prefer it over Bondo. You definitely want to wear gloves when working with this resin though, because it is gross stuff. You don't want this on your skin at all. But when applying the resin, you want to keep your coats light. We're going to do this over probably 2 to 3 coats of resin, but you want to do it light because it will try to pool in some of the corners of the Venator, and we don't want that. We want to keep our details as crisp and as clean as we can so that the details still come out whenever we paint this thing. Now this printer UV resin is about $30 for the bottle that you see me using, but I probably only used a quarter to a third of this entire bottle for the entire ship. So you can do quite a bit with just a single bottle of this resin, so I'd highly recommend it. The only thing is, like I said before, it is very messy. You can see how I have some cardboard under me just to try and keep things clean, and always wear gloves. So for the first layer, I'm just going to do the top side of this ship, and that's because I'm going to set this next to the window to use the UV lights that come naturally from the sun to harden this resin, and I don't want the bottom side to drip all over and cause a big mess. You can see this project's been in the works for a while because it is snowing outside in this video, and it is currently May, so it's been a trip. So after letting that top layer cure for a few days, I applied the same resin to the bottom side, let that cure for a few more days, and now I'm ready to start sanding. And for that, I'm going to use a mouse sander just to really expedite things. You could sand this thing by hand if you wanted to, but that would be so much sanding. We're going to use this to make our lives a lot easier. On it, I think I've got a 200 grit sandpaper pad, so kind of medium grit. You don't want to be too rough, you don't want to rough up the plastic underneath the resin at all. But it's got to be low enough grit to actually sand down the resin, because once this stuff hardens, it is pretty hard. I'm just going to try and get as much of this done with the mouse sander as I can, but then I'm going to follow it up with some hand sanding, just hit all the areas that I couldn't miss because they were too recessed or too hard to reach. So after I did a bit of hand sanding, I wanted to lay down a base coat of black. Black is really good at showing areas that still need a little bit more work, so I wanted to go over the entire ship in that black color to help identify spots that still need a little bit more work. So even though I didn't use the Bondo glazing and spot putty for the entire ship, it is still incredibly useful at fixing really small spots, so that's exactly what I did. The black really helped identify parts that needed a little bit more filling and sanding, and I'll just fill those in with the Bondo glazing and spot putty. The stuff takes around 6 hours to fully cure, so we'll wait for that, and then we'll hand sand this down. So for hand sanding, I'm going to use a 120 grit pad of sandpaper and just use my shop vac to help clean up all the dust that comes off this thing. You're going to want to wear a respirator when sanding this, because it's just going to throw up a bunch of dust and paint, and you don't want to be breathing that. I kind of like how this ship turns out after it's been sanded a bit. You get a nice mix of the black, the white, and the red. I don't know. I think it looks really cool. But we've got to paint over this thing, so let's move on. I'm going to lay down a few coats of this Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler and sandable. It's just going to do another layer of filling in those print lines and making sure our surface is ready for painting. So for the base layer of paint, I'm going to be using a satin stone gray. We're just going to cover the entire ship with it. It's going to be our base layer, our base color for the rest of the ship. We're going to add our other detail colors on top of this, but this is going to kind of be our starting point. So now we get to start taping off some areas and adding some other colors. The first color I'm going to be adding is the iconic red that we all know Venators have. I've got some large blue painter's tape to cover off a lot of the area to make sure that our paint particles don't stray too far and color what they're not supposed to. I'm using an X-Acto knife to cut out the details on the side wings there, but just make sure that the ship is safely covered so we don't overspray. For the red, I'm going to be using a Colonial Satin Red, and I think it's going to turn out great. One of my favorite parts about finishing props is peeling off tape, revealing our awesome looking colors underneath, and that's definitely the case here. I'm going to be doing the same thing for the bottom side. It's got a few different parts that are red, but same process. So there we are. I added some dark gray for the hangers on the bottom side, but again, like before, it's the same process with the red. There's still a lot of detailing and weathering that I want to do to this ship to make it look more realistic so it's not just solid block colors, but I figured that'd be a good topic for the next episode. So, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.